Good evening and welcome to Fishhawk Live and the Great Lakes Fishing Podcast. Thanks so much for joining us this evening here on a Thursday night. And we're joined by Captain Jared Baker from JB's Custom Charters on Michigan's West Coast. Jared, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and talk about fishing.
Jared, before we get started, tell us a little bit about yourself and JB's Custom Charters.
Again, my name's Jared. I run JB's Custom Charters. I'm relatively new to the charter business game. Been doing it for a few years now, but I've been, born and raised in Michigan. I've been fishing the Great Lakes my whole life. I grew up fishing Lower Lake Huron with, my dad. That's where I really, my passion for salmon fishing grew. Luckily, I grew up with a dad that prioritized fishing over his real responsibilities. So every weekend, almost every day was spent out there chasing salmon. And, once, about 15, 20 years ago, the salmon fish on Lower Lake Huron kind of died off a little bit. So we started making trips over to Lake Michigan. And, once I saw the amount of fish and the size of fish that lake has to offer, that's become my home away from home for fishing. So, now I currently operate a charter service that fishes from May to the end of August for salmon. We start in St. Joe's in early May, first couple weeks. As the fish start to migrate north, we go to Pentwater, fish from there from mid-May to about the first week of June, and then we finish up our season in Manistee usually until about the end of August, or until the fish start heading up the rivers. But salmon fishing is something it's more of a passion to me. It's more than a passion to me. It's more of an addiction. I actually live with my first mate, and there's not a day that goes by where we're not talking about salmon fishing, rigging up some new lures or buying new lures. So, I'm just happy to be able to share that experience with other people, and happy to be here now to talk about it.
So you're living with your first mate. I think MTV should make a real world Manistee or something about you guys.
Yeah,
that'd be pretty cool.
That'd be a heck of a reality show, I'll tell you. A lot of messes being cleaned up by my girlfriend, that's for sure.
You fish out of a trailerable boat. You're moving around a lot. Tell us about the boat that you're fishing and how you use it.
Well, I fish out of a Skeeter WX 2060. I chose that boat in particular. It's a multi-species boat, so the opportunities with it are endless. But most importantly, for trolling, I feel like the Skeeter WX series has the most room in the back end of it. It's not as big as the other boats you'll see on Lake Michigan. You see the Tierras, but as far as fishing room, I think it's right there with it. I mean, we could run 14 rods off it easily. There was actually a point where I had a shoot rigger down the middle of my boat, and we'd run 15 rods, but that downrigger is sitting at the bottom of Lake Michigan somewhere near Milwaukee. So now we keep it to 14 rods. But I mean, I couldn't ask for more out of a multi-species fishing boat, that's for sure.
Yeah, that Milwaukee structure, I think, has claimed more than a few downriggers.
Yeah. Could at least take the cannonball, not the whole downrigger, but hey, that's what I get for dragging bottom.
All right, Jared, you start in St. Joe's most of the time of your season, make your way north throughout the salmon season. Correct. Why do you do that instead of calling kind of one port your home?
Well, nothing's predictable with salmon fishing, but the salmon pretty much follow a same migration path. They start at the lower end of Lake Michigan and move north as the water warms up. And my ADD does not allow me to fish at other ports while the salmon aren't there. So instead of, fishing through the tough times, I just chase the fish as they move north. Typically around May, it's a pretty good bet that they'll be at St. Joe. And then as the water warms up, they start moving north, and our fishery's been so good the last couple of years that, once it gets to middle of May to early June, you could catch fish along the whole coastline. But I find that Pentwater is pretty familiar for me, and I have a lot of success there.
What is it like learning all these new areas? I mean, a lot of guys will stay in one spot. They'll learn that area well. They'll know what the fish do in that area, but you're moving along all the time. You're following this migration, which obviously, if you're going where there's fish, it's going to be easier and probably you don't have to figure out as much. But what are some of the challenges that come with following that migration and going out of new ports all the time?
Sure. I mean, the challenges that are presented are different based on the port. the southern end of Lake Michigan does not have much structure as far as depth changes or, points or anything like that. So it's 100% just water temperature and water color based. So, the challenge is in the early season is just finding that warm water. And that comes down to, checking, your resources online before you go out there, making sure that your electronics are tuned in as far as your fishhawk and your depth finder. And, there's been times that we fish in 50 feet of water right at the warm water coming out of the rivers. And then there's been times where we had, like this year, there was, some northeast winds all season, and we were fishing in 200 feet of water, had to run 15 miles offshore. So, the main challenge of fishing the lower end of Lake Michigan is there is no structure as far as, drop offs or points. You really just have to key in on the water temperature changes. Once you move up north, there is a little bit more structure. I like fishing around the point at Pentwater. I feel like that, depending on the direction of the wind, if you get a hard north wind blowing in some cold water, that point will protect it, and you'll get some pockets of warm water on the south end of it. So, everybody knows that salmon are water temperature driven. So it's kind of the same everywhere you go. It's just finding that warm water.
Jared, we're going to starting to get some questions in from some of our viewers, and I think this is a really good one. It's from Carly McNeil on Facebook, and I think it's a she. Maybe it's a man. I can't tell. There's a man and a woman pictured in the photo. But yeah. JB's custom charters. How custom can it be made? What things do you change up to make it fit different customers?
I mean, that's the one thing I think sets my service apart from everybody else. I've had people with, different requests. I've had people call me and just say, I have a boat similar size to yours, but, I've been having trouble catching fish. Like, can you just show me how you set your boat up? So, every time I book a charter, I try to get an idea of what the customer is looking for. So, I've went out before and spent the whole first hour of the day just going through and setting up rods. And if a customer feels comfortable enough, I let them set the rods for me, So the main thing that I want to focus on is making sure the customers get everything that they're looking for out of the charter. I can't speak for other captains. I've been on trips with some other captains, but it's not about just catching fish. It's about whatever the customer wants. If you hire me to take you out for the day, I want to make sure that you get whatever you're looking for. So if you just want to catch fish, that's what we're focused on. If it's learning how to salmon fish and set rods, we're focusing on setting rods. So, and I mean, the customization, you just call me and ask, I'll let you know if it's reasonable, but pretty much, nothing's off limits.
Sorry, guys. We're talking mostly salmon on Lake Michigan tonight, but we're also got into this custom charter thing, and you do fish different waters. I know you do some trips out on the Detroit River, and today you're out on Lake St. Clair. So you can tell us a little bit about some of the other pieces of water that you're typically doing business on and what you're targeting out there.
Yeah, I fish all year round from ice out so the ice comes in. I start my season actually in Lake Erie out of Sterling State Park and trolling for walleye before they go into the Detroit River. And then around April, I start jigging for them in the Detroit River. And that usually takes me right up to May until I head over to do salmon fishing. But there is a short time in June around now where typically the salmon fishing slows down in Michigan, although this year the fishery's been on fire. So kind of missing the salmon fishing now, but I do spend some time trolling for walleye and musky on Lake St. Clair. And then once salmon fishing's done on Lake Michigan, I come back, and from September until the lake freezes, I'm chasing musky and walleye on Lake St. Clair. And again, I mean, if anybody is interested in that, just give me a call. I just advertise trolling trips, and I mean, if you want to go cast for them, we could cast for them, jig for them. I've been fishing these fisheries my whole life. So again, anything you guys want to do, just give me a call.
What's that like trolling for muskies? How does that differ from when you're doing your work out in Lake Michigan for salmon? What are those setups? I mean, how different are they? And tell us a little bit about what you're doing to go after those muskies.
I mean, a big difference is that setting out a 400 copper for salmon, and probably the longest line you'll set out for muskie is maybe 40 feet back. So it's a totally different program. I mean, muskie trolling is it can be a headache in the summer because you also have to worry about weeds. I mean, it's a nonstop grind, making sure that your lures are clear of weeds. But it's a totally different program. It's mainly based off of speed, but it's a lot of fun once you hook into one. Those fish they're the apex predator, that's for sure. Just seeing one of those things and how gnarly their teeth are, it's definitely something everybody should do. That's for sure.
Yeah, we actually do a fair bit of trolling for muskies, not too far from my house out here on the St. Croix River between Wisconsin and Minnesota. It's a great piece of water for muskie trolling. Another question here coming from Facebook. This one's from Al Walkowski. He says Pentwater is your go-to spot, but where would you consider your honey hole for salmon? I guess those are maybe the two same things, but is there another spot that you really like other than Pentwater? Let's go with that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I like Pentwater and Manistee. Manistee, obviously, everybody knows about the ledge out there. You know, it has some great structure on that drop off. But, you know, the two things that both of those ports have in common are the points, you know, Big Point, Little Point, Sable. Those are the main reasons that I picked those ports. I feel like those are great spots to hold fish. You know, like I mentioned earlier, wind directions in either way, depending on the time of year, but especially early in the season, if you get a north wind blowing in that cold water, the south end of those points are gonna, you know, they're gonna be protected and hold that warm water. And some of my best days have been fishing around those points where, you know, I've had 4 or 5 fish on a time, can't even handle how many fish we've had. So I just had great luck there. I mean, they're kind of a tough spot to fish if you're not familiar with it, because the depth changes are drastic, and honestly, the current there is sometimes it's ridiculous. I mean, if you don't have a fishhawk with the current whipping around those points, sometimes you're going to be lost. But if you could really dial in fishing those points, those are some great untapped resources by a lot of fishermen.
All right, here's another one. This one's going back to our walleye talk. Eric Allen Lenz wants to know, what's your favorite way to fish for walleye?
That's a loaded question. My favorite way is to just pull crawler harnesses. That's kind of like a nostalgia thing. That's what I grew up doing with my dad. And, you know, luckily Lake St. Clair is such a great fishery. We go out there and pull crawler harnesses for, you know, 5-hour trips, and we'll catch muskie, you know, 20-inch smallmouth. You'll catch walleye, you know, 4 or 5 pound walleye, perch, everything. So, you know, pulling crawler harnesses definitely brings out the kid in me, that's for sure. But if it's you know, money's on the line, tournament time, I guess I like pulling cranks to catch the big ones. But my heart definitely lies with pulling crawler harnesses.
All right, we're starting to get some rookie questions now. This one from some guy named Bob Hines. He wants to know, with that Skeeter 2060, what's the best method to get a pedestal seat unstuck at 4:30 a.m.?
Well, luckily I have a good friend named Bob and his mate, Quinn. Quinn is probably the strongest man I know. He's the only guy that I know that's stronger than my dad. This guy almost ripped the floor out of my boat trying to get this seat unstuck, man. This guy is like Arnold Schwarzenegger reincarnated. That's the answer. Call Quinn.
All right. He also wants to know why his UV Musclehead meat rig doesn't fire like yours does.
Because he doesn't have the confidence in it. Fishing's all about confidence, man. If you don't believe in the bait, it's not going to go for you.
All right, Bob. I hope that you got your questions answered. Maybe one day Bob will catch a salmon too.
Maybe. We could only pray, man.
All right. Here's another one from Facebook. What's a bucket list fish that you haven't caught yet?
Oh man, that's tough. You know, it's going away from the Great Lakes, but I've always had a dream to catch a tarpon. I've done a decent amount of saltwater fishing, but I've yet to hook into a tarpon. I've, you know, obviously seen videos and pictures, and just the acrobatics of them is insane. You know, I guess if you want to go more local, my goal this year, definitely think we're going to see one come out of Lake Michigan, but I want to catch that 40-pound salmon swimming in Lake Michigan this year.
All right. Here's one that kind of same related. It's David Lafayette wants to know, what's your most satisfying catch of all time?
Most satisfying catch of all time. That is tough. Jeez. I can't even. I mean, I don't even know where to start. But I mean, there's been plenty of times. I mean, my mate Josh Orjahowski and I fished some tournaments before, and we've. I remember a couple years ago we had a last second walleye. We had no fish in the box, and I caught a 6-pounder to win the tournament within the last 30 minutes. So, anytime that you could pull out a buzzer beater, whether it's a trip that you're running or a tournament, when you get that last second fish, it's always a good feeling.
Randy Beavis joins us just about every week. He's on here again tonight, and he wants to know, when you're trolling for kings, what speed do you trust, your GPS speed from the fish finder or your probe speed of the ball?
I trust them both. I mean, it's important to keep your eye on both, just so you know what the current's at. I mean, I think they're both true. You could trust them both. I mean, I run a Lowrance and obviously Fishhawk. I mean, these are top name brands because their products work. I mean, when it comes to what my lures are doing, I'm always looking at my Fishhawk. That's why the saying, whoever came up with the saying that trolling without a Fishhawk is just boating, should get a raise, because I couldn't stress that enough, that especially in Lake Michigan or any of the Great Lakes, they're all just there's currents running through them any time of the year. So I don't look at my graph speed as much, but it's important to keep on it just to know what the current's like down there. But you always got to have your Fishhawk down there just to know the action on your lures.
All right, one from Ron Seaver. I hope it's Seaver, and he has how has this season differed from last year, lake trout and kings? You talked about earlier about this year kind of being a banner year, so I'm going to just play off of Ron's question and ask, why do you think that this year has been better than what it's been in the past? Because we're hearing that from a lot of different captains right now.
Yeah.
Things are good, and fishing has been really good. What do you think it is about this year that's made it good?
There's a lot of factors that go into it. I think the DNR does a great job handling our resources. Obviously all of our fishermen, buying licenses and helping the DNR, support the efforts that they have put into Lake Michigan. I've seen a lot of naturally reproducing fish come out, especially some big ones, and even stockfish have been thriving. So I just go out there and catch the fish. You might have to ask the DNR on why it's been such a great year. But I mean, it's definitely, the numbers that I've been seeing have been outrageous. And, I remember 2 or 3 years ago, there was I think a 37-pounder caught out of Ludington in one of the fall tournaments, and everybody's mind was blown. My mind was blown. I didn't think it was possible. But this year in the spring, there's been 36, 37, 38 pounders. So, I think it's at a perfect balance where the numbers are still good, and then there's they're not overpopulated, so there's plenty of bait to go around. So I think there's still fishable numbers if you could find them, and the size of them is just ridiculous.
All right, we're still going through some viewer questions. Eric Allen Lenz once again wants to know. He says he has a Fishhawk TD he uses to probe temperatures on Lake Huron. He wants to know if you use your Fishhawk while fishing walleye, especially on St. Clair, for understanding the currents there.
That's funny. Eric's going to make me give away one of my best secrets, but I do. I mean, I honestly, the probes on my obviously mounted to, are the monitors mounted to my boat, and I have my probe on me all the time. So there's currents going through Lake St. Clair, especially fishing near the shipping channel, and speed is everything when you're fishing in the action on your lures. So I don't keep them down all day when I'm fishing Lake St. Clair, just because of the amount of weeds in that lake. But I do drop them just on just down when I first start, just to see what the current's like going each way. Because depending on the wind or the water levels, the current, I mean, that could change it by a whole mile an hour. So I use it pretty much everywhere I go. I mean, any Great Lake that I'm fishing on, I bring my Fishhawk with me.
All right, some guy named Josh wants to know, what do you do when it gets late in the morning and the fishing seems to shut down? How do you adjust to catch more fish? I don't know if you know this guy, but he's been watching since we started.
Yeah, I might know him a little bit, but I mean, that's a loaded question. You definitely have to shake things up. The bite's always different, midday. Mornings are typically pretty easy. Everybody knows that. You got to get out there first thing for the morning bite. But I mean, over the last few years, just the SWR rig on my lowest downrigger and just running a 10-inch Dreamweaver paddle with a meat rig. I mean, it's lights out. I don't think that combo ever leaves my lowest downrigger. I mean, everybody has a different theory on it. You could ask 10 fishermen, they'll give you 10 different answers. But for me, it's a meat rig on my lowest rigger with the SWR rig.
All right, let's get back to kind of this. I really want to get into your boat, and that
Okay.
You're using a trailerable boat. That obviously gives you the advantage of being able to move around, go port to port. What are some of the other advantages that you find with having a smaller trailerable boat?
I mean, obviously you could get in the tighter spaces. Like you said, going port to port, there was, times this year where, I keep in touch with Bob, and, he fishes ports near me. And if he says the fishing's better down there, I'll ask my clients, see if they want to make the trip down there. We'll go down there and catch fish. I don't think the only real disadvantage is obviously rougher weather. You're going to be, a little bit more comfortable in a bigger boat, but we could run just as many rods as the bigger boats, and I think it gives a little bit more intimate experience for the customers. They're right there in the action, reeling in rods and catching fish. When the fish hits the deck, everybody gets to see it. So for me, I don't think I'll ever switch to a bigger boat.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you next. Is what do you feel like you're losing out on by having a smaller boat that you would get if you had something larger?
Yeah, I mean, like the main thing I touched on is just, there's some days where, there's never been too many times where I felt unsafe in my boat, but I mean, there's some times where you do take a little bit of a beating compared to if you're in a 30-foot tier, obviously. But, the fishing space is right there, just right. We could run just as many rods. Obviously a cabin is something that you're missing, but our front decks on these boats are just as big as a cabin. So, you're really not missing much. The flexibility that you have with the waters that you could fish, and, just moving port to port is, I can't even imagine being stuck at one port.
You mentioned getting a bunch of lines out despite the smaller boat. Tell us a little bit about how you're getting. You said you're fishing 14 lines. What are you doing to get those 14 lines out? How are you getting your spread out?
Well, yeah, we typically run just our 2 downriggers. We're going to run 4 dipsies at all times. And then, honestly, you could fit as many boards out there as you want with the advancements in technology with the weighted lines and, the inline planer boards. The opportunities are endless, but, typically we start with our downriggers. We'll have our, depending on the time of year, it'd either be a braid dipsy diver or a wire dipsy diver. And then I'm a big fan of the slide divers that have come out, because they've come out with attachments as far as, bigger rings and bigger weights. So they have all the capabilities as normal dipsy divers, but you could put longer leads. So we always have our high divers as slide divers. And then, I like to mix it up. So I always run leadcore, copper, and steel, a mixture of everything. If one's going, I'll wholesale on something, but typically you'll find me running a little bit of everything.
That's really interesting. A lot of the guys we talk to, they're either leadcore guys or they're copper guys, or
really.
So you're kind of mixing it up, and what do you kind of find typically is the ticket while you're out there?
That's why I mix it up. Every day is different. Salmon are probably the hardest fish to figure out. Day to day, the bite's different. So I'm always mixing up my spread. There's never a time that I'm wholesaling on all leadcore or all copper. If leadcore is going a little bit better, I'll put them all, most of my outsides leadcore, but I'll still keep a couple of coppers out there, because you'll never know when the bite switches up. I have noticed that, fish seem to key on, leadcore or copper. It might have a different action in the water. So I understand why people like one versus the other, but even when it comes to lure, I never really like wholesaling anything. I like to keep a good mix out there.
All right, Bob Hines asking. Bob, on last one, you and Bob Everly wants to know, slides and wire divers or the fixed divers. Why haven't we discussed this?
I thought we did. I stopped by his boat one day, and I was trying to be a spy and see what kind of spread he was running, and I stole some tricks from him on his slide divers. But hey, man, he has my number. We could talk about it anytime. I can't talk about it on here. We can't give away all of our secrets, man. Come on.
I think Bob's trying to get you to give away some of your secrets.
Yeah, I mean, come on. You got my number.
All right, your mate's asking again. He wants to know. It sounds like maybe you've got a few rod holders on the boat. Wants to know how many rod holders do you have on your boat?
Oh, rod holders. I typically never use them all. So I have rod trees, obviously, with 6. I mean, it's going to total out to 18, I think. 18. I usually keep everything available in case we got to move rods to one side. If we get a fish on, I'll pull some lines and move them to the other side of the boat. But I definitely always make sure there's more rod holders than needed. Either we're putting a net in there or rods that aren't being used. So 18, I think, is the final count.
All right, Ron's back with another question. He wants to know what your typical rod setup is to start the day and how it changes after the morning bite. Do you go more stealth? Do you run glow in the midday? He's got a couple questions there. But how do you kind of adjust things throughout the day, I guess, is the main
yeah, sure.
question.
I mean, obviously it's going to change day to day, but the typical rule of thumb that I follow is early morning. Rods or lines are going to be a little bit higher. I usually keep my coppers stowed away for the first morning bite. It's going to be a heavy lead core spread. Stuff's going to be a little bit higher in the water column, and I find that spoons work a little bit better. I've had more luck at least with spoons, glow spoons, early morning. But then once the sun comes up, I like to switch over more to paddles and meat rigs more. Floppers and flies and meat rigs, and then just you got to keep an eye on your graph. A lot of times I'll see the fish move down, lower in the water column once the sun comes up. I think a lot of people write those lower marks off as lake trout, but I find that if you drop your lowest downrigger down to those marks with a meat rig or a paddle and a fly, you'll pick up some midday kings. And picking up some kings midday when the bite's tough, that can make or break a trip for sure.
All right, let's go back to that boat a little bit. There's a lot of people right now, Jared, they've been fishing inland lakes. They see what's going on. They see these salmon. They want to go try it. So if you got somebody that's got a boat that they've been fishing inland waters with, that could be similar to what you're fishing with. What's your best advice to these aspiring Great Lakes anglers?
I mean, obviously, first things first, you got to make sure that you're safe. So just keeping an eye on the weather reports, making sure that you have a good source for that. But, any boat can make it out there if you find the right day. But after that, I mean, it's just, knowledge is power. Just making sure that you're doing your research before you go out. Just increasing your network. Talk to some guys that have been out there and done it before. Most people are willing to share information, and the more you know before you go out there, the better trip you're going to have. I mean, don't go out there and just do it willy-nilly. Fish, salmon are tough to catch. So if you go out there and you don't catch any fish, you're going to be discouraged. So make sure you do it right the first time. First, like I said, first thing, make sure that you're safe. But just try to do as much research as you can. And there's a lot of resources online with YouTube and social media, but I think the best way is to call, local bait shops or call some people, that have been out there and done it before, and, take a little bit of advice from everybody.
All right. You talked a little bit about safety, but what are some things that you'd say, like, this is really important equipment that you should get? And I don't want to try to make this a softball trying to go after fishhawk, but like there are a lot of people that say, hey, do I need downriggers? What type of electronics are important? What type of rods? Like, what would you say are kind of the big things that they should be looking at if they're going to try to set their boat up to go do this?
I mean, like you said, if you want to start from the top, I mean, if you want to go all in, downriggers and, a fishhawk is important. It's going to uncover some stuff that you'll never be able to see without it, as far as water temperature, speeds, things of that nature. But just to start, I mean, there's so many options out there. I mean, fishermen are smart people, and, they've come up with everything. So with the weighted lines, I mean, you have so many options between copper, lead cores, weighted steel. With dipsy divers, they have slide divers, mag divers. You could really cover the whole water column with just weighted lines and dipsy divers. So I would think starting out if you don't want to get too far with the money investment, you got to have some dipsy divers and some weighted lines. Those definitely produce fish all day. So I think anybody can go out there and have a productive day with a couple dipsy divers and some weighted lines, whatever you prefer, whether it's weighted steel or lead cores.
All right, that brings us to this question from Scott on Facebook. Any particular lengths of the weighted steel you find to be more productive than others?
Depends on the day. I like to run my weighted steels as my longer lead. So, I have like 200 through 400. This year with all the northeast winds that we had in the spring, the fish were really deep. So, my 250 through 350 were just on fire. But who knows I don't know what the fall is going to bring, but sometimes the fish are higher in the water column, so those could be dead. But I will say full confidence this spring that 250 through 350, I just couldn't even keep them in the water half the time.
All right. Here's one from, we'll go with Trevor McNeil. And Trevor would like to know what influenced your decision to get into the fishing charter business as a profession more than just a hobby. I'm assuming that Trevor knows you because I'm seeing some other questions pop up that make it sound like you guys are buddies.
Yeah. Trevor is a good friend. We actually have a trip book coming up here. So, but as far as getting into the business, I don't have any. Well, I didn't have any real close friends that were in the business. So, it was never really a thought in my head. I just worked sales my whole life coming out of college, and then the company that I was working for let me go. So I had a decision whether to get back into sales and try to sell stuff that I didn't really care about, or chase something that I was truly passionate about. So I got a job with a tackle company and used that opportunity to buy all new gear, and then I took out my 401k and started my business. So the good thing is I get to do what I love now. The bad thing is I'm going to be doing it till I'm 90 years old because I don't have a retirement fund anymore. But yeah, that's what spurred it.
All right, so I think that actually brings up a good question. I think what's the most difficult part of being a charter captain? What's kind of the stressors of the job?
If you ask me, it's cleaning fish. I'm kind of self-conscious about cleaning fish, so if my mate's not there with me, that's number one for me. But more seriously, I mean, I really take pride in my job, and I really just want to make sure that the customers that I have on my boat get the full experience that they're looking for. So, the days that fishing's tough are, the night before, if fishing was tough, I'll lose sleep over it, just thinking, trying to make sure that I make the experience memorable for them. So, I try to do my best with a trailerable boat to, follow the fish and make sure I'm on some good fish. But I think the number one thing is when fishing is tough is, it kind of hurts my heart to let the customers down. So that's the number one problem I've found.
Well, that leads us into another question. We're getting a ton of questions tonight. I'd like to know if I were to book a charter with you and I wanted to change the type of fish that we go for midway through the trip, would you be able to do that? Also, and I'm going to read this because I know I've seen your website. Also, what happens if we have a bad day and we don't catch any fish on a charter?
I mean, like I said, I put custom in the name because I'm willing to do anything. I do run combo trips as far as walleye and musky. There's people who were out salmon fishing want to get a couple lake trout while we're out there. So if you want to switch it up, absolutely. I'll let you. I'll give my input. If I think it might not be a good call, I'll let you know. But it's your trip. If you come out with me, we're doing whatever you want to do. And you saw my website, so if there's a rough day, I offer the no fish, no pay guarantee. So I honestly don't have it in me to charge somebody some money if we go out there. If you hire me to catch fish and I don't catch any fish, there's no chance I'll be taking your money. So that is a benefit to booking with me for sure.
All right, here's one from Tom Andrus, and Tom wants to know what type of meat do you use for your meat rigs?
It depends what's available. I know a lot of guys like to brine their stuff. I'm a little bit too lazy to do that, so I do a Dreamweaver or Stinger. It's worked for me, every season. So, I stick with that, and until it stops working for me, that's what I'm going to stick with.
All right, Chuck Jacobs on Facebook. What colors and bait do you find work the best when you're chasing silver?
That's again, it depends on, the bite. Salmon change every day. You just got to really pay attention to what's going for you. There are some rule of thumbs, people like to run more blues in the spring and greens, midsummer, but I don't really follow that. I like to keep a spread of everything. And then once, a fish goes on a certain color, I try to, key in on that color. I will say that I like to run my brighter colors like chartreuses and oranges higher in the water column, top 20 feet. From like 20 to 50 feet, I like to run blues and greens. And then anything lower than that, I'm usually going darker colors, purples and blacks.
All right, it's July 1st as we record this, and I'm going to let you go fishing on Lake Michigan, the port of your choice. But you can only put 4 lines in the water. What's going to be on those lines, and how are you going to set them up?
All right, that's a good one. I'm going out of the port of Manistee because, like I said, that's kind of my home port once the season wraps up. My number one lure of the last 3 years has been a 10-inch Dreamweaver paddle with a musclehead meat rig on my lowest downrigger. I don't think that's come off my downrigger pole for, the last 2 years on an SWR rig. I got to run a Blue Dolphin on my low diver, and then I'm going to run a high diver with Pink Dots Dreamweaver 8-inch paddle and a Jayco's Wild Thing fly on my high diver, and then I'm gonna throw a leadcore out there with the orange crust and try to get a steelhead too.
All right, very good. That sounds like a good time.
Absolutely, always is. Anytime you're out there salmon fishing is a good time.
All right, Michael wants to know, what advice would you give to someone who wants to start their own charter business?
I would say definitely just make sure that you're passionate about it. Don't do it if it's something that you're just trying to do just to get a little bit of extra money, because it's definitely not the easiest thing in the world to do. But if you're really passionate about it, it is easy. I would definitely say do your research. Make sure that you're confident in putting fish in the boat, because that's gonna help you succeed. And make sure that you are aware of all the financial challenges that come with it. It's not a easy thing to jump into mentally or financially, but if you have a true passion for it and you're confident in your ability to put fish in the boat, it's a great time. And if that's the case for you, I suggest you do it now.
All right. What's the most rewarding part of being a charter captain for you? What's your favorite part, the thing that you live for and gets you up out of bed in the morning?
That's easy. It's just, seeing the people's reaction, especially salmon fishing. For people I've never done it before, or people who've, fished their whole life and never hooked into a salmon, seeing the reaction when a king hits and they just peel off 300, 400 feet of line. It's like nothing you'll ever experience. I've done it my whole life. So to me, it's more rewarding to see other people experience it. When that fish hits the deck and everybody's jaws hit the floor, it honestly it keeps me going. That's the best thing, is just seeing the reaction and just being able to share the experience with other people who've never experienced something like that before.
All right, here's one from YouTube. I think this is the first question we've got from YouTube tonight. This is from Gilbert Singleton. This is, do you plan to ever leave freshwater and go to saltwater?
For business purpose, as far as running charters, no. I love fishing saltwater. I've done it, since I was little. We'd make trips down to Florida, and it's one of my favorite things to do. You'll never know what you hook into out there, and the flight of those fish is just unreal. But I charter on the Great Lakes because I'm confident that I could catch fish here. I've done it my whole life. It's almost second nature at this point. I'm constantly learning, but if you put me out in the ocean right now and try to catch some fish, I will be lost. So no, I don't plan on moving to saltwater.
All right. One of the other things I saw on your website, Jared, is that you do some kids fishing trips.
Absolutely.
Tell us a little bit about those.
Like I touched on earlier with Eric's question. Luckily I live near Lake St. Clair, and It's a world-class fishery for walleye, bass, and musky. So it's a great opportunity to just go out there and pull some baits around, and it's catching fish is not a problem. So kids typically don't have the same attention span as a diehard fisherman. So we go out there for 3-hour trips is what I run, and we catch everything from perch to smallmouth bass to pike, walleye, muskie. And it's a great experience for someone who's just getting into fishing. I mean, it's honestly just a world-class fishery. I'm blessed to be able to fish it, and and honestly, sharing it with the kids, that's what gets kids hooked, is having a good day going out there catching different fish. So that, yeah, if anybody has any kids that think they're into fishing and you want to take them out on a trip, just give me a call. It's a great time.
We've been talking a lot of king fishing, and I think that's something that most people are interested in. But let's talk lake trout for a little bit. What's the lake trout like in the areas that you're fishing?
Lake trout, they are thriving, that's for sure. I typically don't target lake trout that much unless a customer requests it. But I mean, I still catch lake trout without even trying. I mean, if you just run a simple salmon spread, you're going to catch 4 or 5 lake trout guaranteed. And the times that I do target lake trout, I mean, filling up the box with lake trout I don't want to say it's easy, but I mean, the lake trout are it's so crazy how great of a fishery we have for you to be able to go out there and catch some kings and then, fill up the box with lake trout. It's an awesome option to have there. Again, I prefer the kings just based off of the fight, but the lake trout fishery has been good for years, and I don't see it slowing down at all.
Well, you mentioned the fight, and you mentioned steelhead a little bit earlier. How about the steelhead in your neck of the woods?
Yeah, steelhead are one of my favorite fish to catch. I actually, a lot of my younger years were spent going to Erio in Lake Erie. My dad and I knew a charter captain over there, so I kind of grew up fishing for steelhead and the acrobatics of those fish, and just how crazy they are when they fight. It's all close to fighting a salmon as far as the excitement that you get. So luckily this year with the winds that we had and fishing offshore a little bit more for the salmon, we cooked into a bunch of steelhead. And just like I said, those things will jump 10 times out of the water before you could even get the rod out of the rod holder. I think they're right up there with as far as fighting a salmon. I love catching steelhead.
Yeah, they're a lot of fun. Eric Allen Lenz just come on, steelhead, awesome fish. Jared, is there something that I didn't ask you about tonight that you really wanted to talk about tonight?
No, we covered a lot. I mean, my contact information is available online. If anybody has any questions, I love talking fishing. It doesn't matter if you're booking a trip or not. Just give me a shout. I'll talk fishing with you all day and all night. I just want to thank you guys for having me on here. Shout out your products. Everybody already knows that fishhawks is something that you need if you're fishing the Great Lakes, but your guys' customer service is out of this world too. I remember when I first got my fishhawk, I put the batteries in and put the battery pack in backwards, so I shorted out the cord. And I didn't know it at the time, but I sent it in to you guys, and you guys sent it back in 2 days, I think. And you had the most politely written note to tell me how stupid I was for putting in the battery pack backwards. I was thoroughly impressed.
I think that's what we do in Minnesota. We're very, very politely rude at the same time.
Yeah. No, but honestly, I was super impressed with how you guys took care of it. No problem, even though it was a user error. And I mean, it might have been 2 days it was out of commission. So, again, just thank you guys for having me on here.
Yeah, I just shout out to the guys and gals who do our customer service. It's a good company to work for, because I know that whatever we talk about is always stood behind very well, and they do an awesome job with helping people out and getting everything working for them. So got to give those guys their props tonight. Also, if you're on Instagram, Jared's an awesome Instagram follow. You can follow him at The Real, REEL, J Bake, right? J Bake Fish.
That's right. No, The Real J Bake. You got it.
Real J Bake. Yeah. A lot of awesome stuff on there. Jared Baker, thanks so much for coming on Fishhawk Live tonight. Really appreciate everybody coming on. Let's pick out I liked an early one we had. Let's pick out a question here. We're going to go with Carly McNeil. and I know I think it's somebody that you know, but I like the question. It was, how custom is a custom charter? So, Carly, give us a message with your information on it, and we'll get something out to you. So, Jared Baker, thanks so much for coming on the show. Thanks to everybody for watching, and thanks to everyone on the podcast platform for listening. You can catch us on SoundCloud. You can catch us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, you name it. So, everybody have a great night, and we will talk to you next week.